Step into a world of private islands, diamond-studded galas, and staggering fortunes, and discover the tragic tale behind one of history's most legendary heiresses. Christina Onassis was born into unimaginable wealth, yet she battled scandal, heartbreak, and a haunting family legacy at every turn. In this video, we explore her extraordinary life, from the high-stakes boardrooms of a global shipping empire to the private struggles that followed her to the grave. Stick around for a revealing story that proves money can't always buy happiness. She was born into a world that sparkled with diamond chandeliers, shimmered with million-dollar yachts, and glimmered in a swirl of paparazzi flashbulbs. From the moment Christina Onassis arrived on December 11th, 1950 in New York City, her life was mapped out by fortunes that dwarfed the imaginations of even the wealthiest circles. She was the only daughter of Aristotle Onassis, at that time considered one of the world's wealthiest, most mercurial shipping magnates, and Athena Tina Livanos, herself the heiress to another Greek shipping dynasty. It was as if Christina had been born into an epic saga that spanned oceans, continents, and enough intrigues to fill a dozen novels. And yet, for all the glow and sheen of her inheritance, her story was laced with heartbreak and tragedy, as though some ancient Greek curse haunted her bloodline. She was the last princess of a shipping empire, a woman who could have anything in the world, except it seemed lasting peace or happiness. Growing up in the Onassis household meant that her earliest memories were set against a backdrop of private islands, sprawling villas, and Swiss boarding schools. Where other children might take family road trips, Christina flew on her father's private jets, crossing from Monte Carlo to London or from Buenos Aires to Paris as casually as one might take the school bus. She was the younger sister to Alexander Onassis, who was 2 years older and was often her protector and confidant. Her father, Aristotle, was a complex figure, brilliant in business, merciless in competition, and famously entangled in a series of high-profile romances, including one with opera legend Maria Callas. Christina's mother, Tina, was the daughter of Stavros Livanos, another shipping titan, so the marriage had essentially merged two massive fortunes. Yet no amount of money could insulate Christina from the emotional upheaval that rattled the family. Her parents divorced in 1960, and the experience cut through Christina's early childhood innocence like a cold wind. At just 9 years old, she realized that trust and stability could be as fleeting as a passing wave. She saw her father entangled in public scandals, his relationships under constant scrutiny. She loved him, but she resented him too. She feared his temper, admired his brilliance, and quietly yearned for a normal father-daughter bond she never quite had. Meanwhile, her mother Tina struggled with her own heartbreaks and resentments toward Aristotle. Christina learned early that money brought an entourage of yes-men, but it couldn't mend a broken family. It was an oddly solitary upbringing, a life of tutors, servants, and nannies, a rotating cast of high society figures who might show up to the Onassis residences in Paris or on Scorpios for lavish parties, only to vanish days later. From an early age, Christina stood out for her linguistic abilities. She learned English, French, and Greek fluently, picking up bits of Swedish along the way. Her formal education took place in some of the most elite institutions on the planet: Headington in Oxford, Queen's College in London, and La Rosey in Switzerland, each a fortress of privilege where children of the world's aristocracy brushed shoulders. She would later say that she felt like she belonged everywhere and nowhere. She was more comfortable in the boardroom or an airport lounge than in a typical teenage crowd. If asked about her aspirations at age 16, she might have said she wanted something simpler than all this. But simplicity and the Onassis name were incompatible. Christina's father may have spoiled her, but he also expected loyalty, respect, and a certain cunning that matched his own. Aristotle Onassis commanded a shipping empire spanning 90 vessels, plus real estate holdings and even an airline, Olympic Airways. To be his child meant learning the nuances of global business deals at an age when most kids were still learning to drive. He would lecture her on supply and demand, on the influence of politics on maritime trade routes. She absorbed much of it, if only to win his approval and maybe earn one of those half smiles that revealed he was proud of her. She idolized Alexander, too, who shared their father's fascination with aviation and entrepreneurship. Behind the gates of affluence, though, family tension seethed. Aristotle's affair with Maria Callas was an open secret. Tina's heartbreak was likewise public knowledge. Christina grew up toggling between her parents' separate worlds, adapting to whichever environment she found herself in, her mother's chic Parisian circle or her father's lavish Monte Carlo gatherings. By the time she was in her late teens, it was clear she was both rebellious and sensitive, prone to impulsive decisions, but also desperately craving stability and love. Perhaps that craving explains her first marriage, which set the tone for her tumultuous private life. She was barely 21 when she married Joseph Bolker, a 47-year-old American real estate developer who was divorced and Jewish, with 4 children already. The wedding happened in Las Vegas, just 6 weeks after they first met. It was the classic scenario of a sheltered heiress rebelling against everything her father stood for. Aristotle was livid, threatening to disinherit her if she went through with it. When she did, he reportedly offered Bolker $500,000 to back out. The tabloids erupted, painting Christina as a misguided, poor little rich girl, unappreciative of her father's empire, entangled with a man more than twice her age. The marriage lasted only 9 months, collapsing under the weight of paternal pressure and the irreconcilable differences between a naive young heiress and a seasoned, older man with complex personal baggage. By 1972, Christina was single, again tabloid fodder, and newly aware of just how controlling her father could be. In 1973, tragedy slammed into her life with devastating force. Her beloved brother Alexander died in a plane crash at the Athens airport. He had been piloting a small aircraft, a Piaggio P-136, when it went down seconds after takeoff. Alexander's injuries were so horrific that doctors declared him brain dead the next day. Christina rushed from London to Athens, only to watch her older brother slip away. They had been each other's confidants, forging an emotional bond against the storms that roiled their parents' world. Losing him was like having a pillar knocked out from under her. She scattered his ashes on Scorpios, their private island in the Ionian Sea, feeling a grief that was almost inconceivable. Aristotle took it even harder. Already in frail health, he spiraled into despair, as though the gods had exacted a cruel penalty for his hubris. Christina was just 22, yet the burden of mortality came crashing into her gilded life. A sense of doom hovered around the Onassis name, as if they were cursed by their own fortune. Her father, undone by Alexander's death, spiraled in his own health battles. By 1975, he succumbed to complications from myasthenia gravis at age 69. Christina was at his bedside in a Paris hospital, hearing his last gasped words, "Christina, my love." She was suddenly an orphan at 24. Her mother, Tina, had died just months earlier in 1974 from a barbiturate overdose that was possibly a suicide. So within a short span of time, Christina lost her brother, mother, and father, leaving her the sole heiress to a multi-billion-dollar empire. There was no time for the kind of mourning an ordinary person might have. The Onassis board demanded direction. The shipping conglomerate needed leadership. Even though she had never received formal business training, Christina stepped in as president of the Onassis Group, managing a corporate labyrinth that stretched across continents. In that crucible, she proved unexpectedly adept at executive decisions. While she couldn't replicate her father's ferocity, she had enough business savvy to recognize unprofitable ventures and unload them. She consolidated the empire, preserving a fortune that was then estimated at $5 billion, the equivalent of over $25 billion today. Investors and shipping magnates who might have expected her to fail were occasionally surprised by her tenacity. Yet the press rarely covered her accomplishments in finance. Instead, they chased stories of her love affairs, her weight fluctuations, and her rumored drug use. As she hopped between Paris, Monte Carlo, and Buenos Aires, the tabloids painted her as a jet-setting party girl who reeled from one heartbreak to another, unable to find lasting happiness. Her second marriage came in 1975, the same year she inherited the Onassis Group. This time, it was to Alexandros Andreadis, another Greek shipping heir, someone more in line with what her father might have approved of. Yet it lasted only 14 months, undone by mutual infidelity. Christina supposedly took up with a Paris playboy while Andreadis pursued his own affairs. The divorce was finalized in Athens, costing her $1 million settlement. One might think that with such a short marriage behind them, both parties would fade into discreet memory, but paparazzi lens and gossip columns turned it into a media spectacle. Christina's romantic missteps were as public as her father's once were, stirring an eerie sense of déjà vu. Then in 1978 came one of her boldest moves. She married Sergei Kauzov, a Soviet shipping agent whom some whispered was connected to the KGB. It was the height of the Cold War, and the idea of a Greek shipping princess tying the knot with a Soviet bureaucrat bordered on scandalous spies, oil, shipping alliances, political undertones. She even traveled to Moscow to wed him, and rumor had it she gifted him a $7 million tanker as a wedding present. For a while she tried to adapt to life in Russia, but the reality of Moscow's gray winters and possible surveillance wore her down. By 1980, after just 16 months, they were divorced as well. Kauzov allegedly kept the tanker, ensuring that even her heartbreak had a massive price tag. Friends said Christina felt trapped and isolated there. Perhaps she was trying, in some rebellious corner of her psyche, to do the exact opposite of what her father would have wanted, even after his death. For all her daring, each failed marriage seemed to chip away at her spirit. The tabloids feasted on her personal tragedies, branding her every misstep as proof she was a spoiled heiress. They rarely credited the grit she brought to board meetings, or her nuanced negotiations that kept the Onassis shipping lines profitable amid rising fuel costs and global instability. Nor did they see the lonely nights, the tears, the phone calls to friends in search of genuine connection. Instead, they latched onto her weight problems. She oscillated between extremes, sometimes ballooning up to 300 pounds, then shedding 80 pounds in a matter of months, fueled by a cocktail of amphetamines for appetite suppression and barbiturates to help her sleep. The cycle was punishing. She would appear at parties in Monte Carlo looking radiant and slimmer, only to vanish for weeks and reemerge heavier and sullen, often checking into clinics to regain her footing. This destructive pattern took an obvious toll on her health, but it also signaled a deeper psychological anguish. Her fourth marriage in 1984 seemed at first like it might offer a real chance at happiness. Thierry Roussel was a French pharmaceutical heir, handsome, charming, and seemingly well-matched. With him, She had her only child, Athena, born in 1985, an event that must have brought Christina a sense of renewed hope. She poured her love into that baby girl, naming her after her own mother, Athena Levanos. Perhaps she dreamed that Athena would break the cycle of heartbreak that plagued the Onassis women. But even here, the cracks formed early. Roussel had been having an affair with another woman, Marianne Gaby Landhage, throughout Christina's pregnancy, fathering 2 children with her while still married to Christina. The betrayal was brutal. She confronted him in 1985, only to learn the full dismal truth. Everything she had pinned her hopes on was crumbling once again. Their marriage limped along, overshadowed by bitterness and distrust, until 1987. By then, her world was a swirl of legal wrangling, rumored overdoses, quiet rehab stints, and a toddler who might inherit the entire Onassis fortune. The divorce from Roussel cost her a reported $10 million settlement, pocket change compared to her net worth, but another emotional blow that left her feeling more jaded and alone than ever. She once confided to a friend that she felt cursed, as though the Onassis name carried an ancient hex. Everything that can go wrong does, she reportedly said, eyes hollow from heartbreak. But the tragedies in her life had a more harrowing dimension than broken marriages and scandalous affairs. Her mother's death in 1974 was officially from a barbiturate overdose, likely suicide. Her father's passing in 1975, her brother's plane crash in 1973. It was tragedy upon tragedy, each compounding the others. By the time she reached her mid-30s, Christina had lost almost every close family member she'd ever had. That emptiness manifested in her reliance on prescription drugs. Amphetamines fed her need to lose weight. Barbiturates helped her drown her sorrows and quell anxiety. The constant instability, the feeling that she had no one truly loyal to her, except perhaps a few dear friends, weighed heavily on her psyche. She fought in the boardroom to maintain the empire, but battled demons behind the scenes. By 1987, not long after her final divorce, rumors circulated of yet another overdose in London. She was found barely conscious in her room, saved only by quick medical intervention. While tabloids screamed about her near-death experience, few empathized with the decades of loss and betrayal that had shaped her fragile emotional state. The Onassis empire remained strong on paper, but its sole heir was deeply wounded. She confided to people in her circle that she wanted to break free, to find a place or a relationship where she wasn't just Christina Onassis, daughter of Heiress. Some believe she found fleeting peace in the simple act of motherhood, playing with Athena on the lawns of Scorpios, or reading bedtime stories in a lavish Paris apartment. But the sense of looming tragedy never quite lifted. In November 1988, she was in Buenos Aires, at the estate of her dear friends Marina and Roberto Dodero in Tortuguitas. Argentina had become another one of her refugee spots, a place where she could escape the European paparazzi and perhaps build a new life. She was rumored to be planning another marriage, this time to a Greek shipping heir named Jorge Chomlek Joglu. She was just 37 years old, but had already lived multiple lifetimes of drama. On the night of November 18th, she allegedly enjoyed dinner and champagne with Marina, complaining of mild chest pains before heading to bed early. No one suspected it was the last night she'd ever see. The next morning, around 8 a.m., a maid found Christina unresponsive in a bathtub, a nearby bottle of Seconal partially empty. Attempts to revive her failed. She was gone. An autopsy later cited pulmonary edema and a dilated heart, aggravated by years of diet drugs and barbiturate misuse, as the cause. It was classified as a heart attack rather than a suicide, though many quietly wondered if Christina's body had simply given out after decades of internal struggles. Her death stunned the global press. She was only 37, leaving behind a 3-year-old daughter who stood to inherit hundreds of millions, but would never know her mother's love beyond the haze of early childhood memories. The funeral took place on Scorpios, where she was buried alongside Aristotle and Alexander, her coffin draped with white lilies. Friends and relatives flew in from across the world, but the attendance was relatively small, barely a couple of hundred people, perhaps testament to how isolated she had become in her final years. In the aftermath, the world's fascination with the Onassis name continued. Her estate, estimated at around $800 million, was held in trust for Athena. Thierry Roussel later mounted legal bids to control the fortune, fueling headlines throughout the 1990s. Photographs of little Athena occasionally surfaced, but Roussel guarded her privacy fiercely. The question lingered, would the so-called Onassis curse affect Athena too? Even as the shipping empire endured, the personal tragedies that had followed Christina and her family seemed to overshadow any material success.